Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Ramadan Reminders by Sapience Institute. I've chosen this verse because our Christian missionary friends, in fact, have misused, misquoted lots of the Quran, but this verse really sticks out in terms of their mistranslating, misquoting, part translating, part quoting. This verse stands out. And this is a verse from Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 116. But the point is, it's a dialogue between Allah and Isa alayhi salam, Christ, son of Mary. From ayah 116 to 118 is a full dialogue. They just quote the first half of the first part of the verse. Now, in context, therefore, for us to understand why these verses are so crucial for us to know about, is because here we have it. So Allah in the Quran, in this verse, in the beginning of the verse 116, says to Isa alayhi salam, "Did you tell people to take you and your mother as two gods besides Allah?" Now they quote this part of the verse, not quoting the rest of the verses, usually not that verse and the verse after and the verse thereafter also up until 118. So why is it crucial for us to know about these verses and the fuller context? That's one reason, because the verse, in fact, in question is misquoted a lot by our Christian missionary friends. But also to understand the great purpose and relevance of the verse in light of the prophetic character, the mission of Isa alayhi salam himself, and what bearing it has for us as Muslims. You see, Allah says to Isa alayhi salam, "Did you tell people to take you and your mother as two gods besides Allah?" The first thing is the meaning of the word Ilah that's used in this, God used in this. Now remember, of course, the Ilah is anything or anybody that people take as an ultimate object of veneration, devotion, prayer, hope, trust, reverence, penitence, all of that. They give it to somebody else other than Allah. That becomes an Ilah. Allah isn't saying you told people take you and your mother as lords of the world, but as two deities besides Allah. Now, the first word spoken by Isa in this context is Subhanak. He says Subhanak, and that's very powerful. Allah's attribute Subhan. What does it mean? It means he's saying, free of all imperfections are you, O Allah. Meaning even that statement itself is enough as a proof against those who did that. It's enough, the word itself. He says, مَا يَكُونُ لِي أَنْ أَقُولُ. I had no right to say what I had no right to say. I couldn't say what I had no right to say. إِن كُنْتُ قُلْتُ فَقَدْ عَلِمْتُ. And if I said it, you would have known I said it. You know what is within me, I don't know what is within you, and you have knowledge of the unseen, I don't have that knowledge of the unseen. That's the first verse, in fact. But then he says to Allah, I only call them to that which you commanded me to call them to. أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ رَبِّي وَرَبَّكُمْ. Worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. That is the prophetic message of all the prophets of Allah. All the universal message, in fact, they all say the same thing. Allah is one, worship Him alone, and not worship us or anybody else except Allah. And so Isa is therefore testifying to Allah, before Allah, that's all I call them to. وَكُنْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ شَهِيدًا مَا دُمْتُ فِيهِمْ. And when I was with them, I was a witness over them, meaning I could check and see what's happening with those people. فَلَمَّا تُوَفَّيْتَنِي كُنْتَ أَنْتَ رَقِيبٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. But when you took me, you were رَقِيبٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, you were the watcher over them. وَأَنْتَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ, and you are a witness over all things. So very powerful, in fact, in this verse, how Isa says to Allah that I was a shaheed, I was a witness over them, and you, O Allah, you were raqib, a watcher over them. But then he says to Allah, and you watch over, and you are the witness over all things. Meaning, saying even what I was a witness to, you in fact witnessed that it was yourself, O Allah. Because Allah witnesses all things. And then he says to Allah, إِن تُعَذِّبْهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ عِبَادُكَ. If you punish them, they're your servants. And if you forgive them, then you are the mighty one and the wise one. It's a beautiful set of verses here, because they show us, number one, the fact that Christian missionaries oftentimes, usually when it comes to these verses, they mistranslate, misquote, partially translate, right? The first few words of the first verse, 116, are mentioned, but nothing else, no context. Definitely not 117, definitely not 118. But together, of course, in this dialogue, we see Allah is in full control. It is Allah alone who deserves worship. No prophet does, only Allah does. And the prophetic message, in fact, of all the prophets of Allah was to declare that to their own people and to bring their people to that oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this dialogue in the next slide between Allah and Isa alayhi salam, that's revealed as a proof against his own people who did that. Remember that you have strands of Christians. You have those who over-venerate Maryam alayhi salam. And of course, they all over-venerate Isa alayhi salam. But they have differences amongst them. They have friction amongst themselves because of these things. So one group, the Protestants, would say to the Catholics, you guys are over-venerating Maryam because they call her the mediatrix. So Catholics call Maryam mediatrix and Jesus as the mediator. And Protestants call Jesus as the sole mediator for the universe, the one who will mediate and save all of us. This is their incorrect belief. But it's really powerful, in fact, if you think about what's being said here. Because Allah says to Jesus, is that what you call people to? Of course, Allah knows that He didn't. It's a proof against them. The fact that him and his mother as two gods besides Allah, to a deity besides Allah, meaning as objects of veneration, of prayer, of hope, of trust, of fear, of reliance, and that's exactly what they did with Jesus Christ and Maryam, Mary. But the point is that they have this friction amongst themselves, and so when we look back at the verses, and you see that, hold on, some groups in fact did take Jesus and Mary, and others took Jesus and blamed the other one for taking only Mary, but then they over-venerated Jesus in doing that. And Allah, and Isa calls his people only to La ilaha illallah, only to worship Allah and make Him the sole kind of object of your devotion and reverence. In these verses 116 to 118 is a beautiful reminder for all of us.